Hey guys, it's Penguin here, and welcome back to another gold making video. In today's video, we are finalizing our crafting profession breakdown series by talking about leatherworking. This is the last one on the list, and while leatherworking is pretty simple in terms of types of items you're going to be crafting, there is actually a lot going on in specializations that definitely makes it a little bit more confusing compared to the other armor professions. So in today's video, we're going to be, of course, talking about all of the new recipes, all of the new equipment, different specializations, different builds, what actually looks like it's going to sell, and also I do want to talk about knowledge points. But without further ado, we're going to get started. As of right now, all crafting professions are covered, so if you like this video and you're interested in another profession, the playlist will be linked down below if you want to check it out. But everybody, thank you so much for watching, and let's get started. And so up first, as always, let's quickly cover our profession best in slot equipment, and leatherworking is pretty simple and basically identical to blacksmithing. One of your accessories, the Artisan Leatherworker's toolset, is going to come from blacksmithing, as well as your high-end tool, which is your Artisan Leatherworker's knife. Then your second accessory, the Arathi Leatherworker's smock, will come from leatherworking, so feel free to either learn that recipe yourself, or you'll have to get another leatherworker to help you out. As always, remember these are the blue rare qualities, meaning these cost artisan acuity, and you'll have to get them off the crafting order system, but remember you can start off with the green tools and work your way up. Another friendly reminder is that each accessory will give you 11 skill, while your tool will give you 18 skill. So if you're going for skill, then I highly recommend targeting the tool first because it will give you the most, but of course it really just comes down to what you want. Now, talking about leatherworking, there is a lot on this list, and there is a lot of artisan acuity involved, but it really comes down to the type of leatherworker you plan on being. The first 5 things listed here are all profession equipment and accessories. So the apron, the gauntlets, the pack, the cover, the smock, these are all for different professions, and they each cost 150 artisan acuity each. So that's going to be very expensive to get all of these recipes, but if you don't even plan on crafting profession equipment, then you can completely really just ignore these recipes until a later date. Additionally, both of the high-end armor kits also cost artisan acuity, so the Stormbound armor kit actually comes from Renown. You need Renown 5, however it also costs 150 artisan acuity, and then the Defender's armor kit has no Renown. You can simply buy it in the main city, but it costs the same. We'll talk about armor kits in just a little bit and about how much gold they can make, but if you're going for the more, multi-craft region-wide auction house, then these armor kits are going to be way more important than the profession gear. And of course, if you're going for crafting orders and profession gear, whether for your alts or for other people, the other items will of course be way more important. Up next, we have a ton of embellished gear. Leatherworking, of course, crafts leather gear, but it also crafts mail gear, so you basically have double the amount of recipes as other professions, but ultimately it's going to come down to best in slot list. So you'll see exactly what these do in game in just a second, but the Sanctified Torchbearer's Grip currently drops from the Spreading the Light quest/event. Then you have the Unifying Flame, which is currently a boss drop. Then you have the Clasp, which is also a boss drop. You have the Vambraces of Deepening Darkness, which is a world creature drop, so can technically drop from a wide range of anything. Then you have this Buckle, which drops yet again from another boss. Then you have the Reinforced Flyers, which comes from Delves. Then you have the Talons, which comes from Voidstone Monstrosities, which is another boss. And lastly, you have these Wrist Wraps, which come from the Theater Trope event. So, like I said, this seems like a lot, but it's really going to come down to best in slot list, which aren't out yet, but it's definitely getting close to that time. And for example, if the flame shows up on a ton of different best in slot lists, obviously targeting this item will be way important than everything else. Who knows, maybe 4 items will show up, maybe only 1 item. We'll just have to see what people think is going to be the best crafted gear for Season 1. Moving on, going back to profession equipment, we have 3 more items. We have the Deep Tracker's cap and pack, which are both skinning related. Then we have the Alchemist hat, and all of these cost 150 artisan acuity, as well as 1500 kesh. Now, this is purchased at the City of Threads, so not the main city, just a slightly different location, but at the end of the day, like I said before, it's going to come down to actually if you plan on crafting with these items or not. Then lastly, we simply have our PvP gear. We have the leather set as well as the mail set, and all of them can be purchased for 7,500 honor each, or you can simply buy the recipe off the auction house because they're all BOE. But with that being said, these items really is just going to depend on the type of crafter you want to be, as well as the best in slot list, because let's face it, if a lot of these don't show up as best in slot, or even wanted in a lot of sets, then it's probably not going to be the end of the world on getting these recipes. Now, one more thing I wanted to quickly shout out and cover is that we do now have this weekly knowledge point list on my spreadsheet, so feel free to check that out. And thankfully, a lot of friendly Discord members, especially Crisco, helped compile this list, and this is kind of the estimated weekly knowledge points you're going to get for each profession. Now, this is up to change. Beta has been changing, some quests have been showing up, then quests were taken away, so this could be a little bit off, but based off the knowledge we have, for leatherworking, you're looking at about 20 points per week, or knowledge points. This doesn't include your first-time bonuses through crafting first-time crafts or from treasures. But the big thing you have to be careful about is 15 points come from patron crafting orders, which is your NPC crafting orders, and obviously if you don't have the recipes to actually craft these items, you could be a little bit short on crafting orders. For example, let's just say 2 of the knowledge points require you to craft this buckle, but you happen to not have that recipe, obviously you can't get those points. So we'll have to see exactly how things lay out, but this is kind of your weekly estimates if you're interested in leatherworking or really any other profession. Now, taking a look at all of the recipes, there's definitely a lot going on. However, if you are familiar with Dragonflight, you definitely have an edge up because a lot of these categories are very, very similar. Up first, we have a ton of different crafting reagents, and these basically apply to the different types of items in their categories that we're going to be looking at later on. Ultimately, this is just a nice way to make gold. I know I made a lot of gold with leatherworking through just crafting high-end crafted reagents, and I feel like this is going to be yet again another great market. Now, fair warning, a downside of this market is that you're dealing with the region-wide auction house, so a lot of cancel scanning, but as somebody who doesn't touch any sort of crafting orders or anything like that, this made me a bulk of my gold in Dragonflight. So up first, like I kind of said, we're going to see these reagents in other crafts, so ultimately it's just going to come down to what items you want, but up here we have the carapace-backed hide, that's probably pronounced wrong. A lot of these hides right here are used in kind of your PvP crafts. Then we have the chitin armor banding. Then we have the crystal fused hide. We have the lay fused hide, the spore coated hide, the storm touched weapon wrap, and lastly we have the writhing hide. Keep in mind this specifically says Nerubian, which we'll go back to in just a few moments. Up next, we do have a few consumables. Everything learned here are your trainer learned recipes, so we have a handful of consumables that are actually just learned from the trainer, and the first one is your basic drum. So right here we have the thunderous drum. These are nice because they don't have quality, meaning they're easily able to be produced. However, because of that, you're really relying on a multicraft and resourcefulness, and this can definitely have tight margins. However, if you like to mass craft and you can get a lot of multicraft and then eventually resourcefulness, this could be a good market for you. In Dragonflight, it was decent, it's just very quickly it became a few gold profit per craft. Up next, we have our basic armor kit. This is going to be nice for the beginning of the expansion, but really your gold in terms of armor kits are going to be in your high-end ones, which we saw in the specialty recipe list. Moving forward, we have our basic BOE gear. So right here, we have the leather types. You have your kind of beginner gear right here. So this is level 71 bands, 71 feet, as well as 71 chest. Then all of this practice gear right here are all level 80. Similar, exact same thing over here, we have our mail gear, level 80 is the toughened, and then we have the chitin, which is your basic 71 gear. Both of these will be really what you're crafting to level up the profession, and the nice thing is that you can really just pick whatever's cheaper. So if leather happens to be cheaper, then you can level up with leather gear, and if mail happens to be cheaper, or I should say chitin, then you can craft the mail gear. Then the only other thing you get from the trainer is just your basic profession equipment. So right here we have a skinning hat, we have the herbalism accessory, then we have the skinning accessory, then we have the leatherworking accessory, so you can craft this for yourself. Then you have an engineering accessory, you have the jewel crafting accessory, blacksmithing accessory, and lastly, the alchemy accessory. So all of these are your lower end BOE items, which you can throw up on the auction house for some extra gold. Moving on to the higher end recipes, all of these either come from that drop list we just took a look at, or this is going to come from Specializations. And up first, we have those high end armor kits that I just alluded to. Right here, this one comes from non-renowned, so simply just 150 artisan acuity. You can read that tooltip right there. And then we have the Stormbound armor kit, which there's the tooltip, and this comes from Renowned 5. So we'll have to see what people want, but you can kind of see those higher end reagents coming into play. Up next, we have the basic unembellished leather gear. This simply all comes from Specializations. Players will be able to apply their own embellishment. So we have the rune branded, which is for all of that. These do require different types of hides depending on which one you're crafting. Then same thing goes with mail. The glyph etched is just the non-embellished mail version. So once again, you can apply your own embellishment and you can just check out the crafting recipes right there. Moving on, we have a ton of embellished gear, and this is kind of where leatherworking gets a little bit complicated, and we'll see that a lot in Specializations. But in terms of what's actually going to be worth unlocking and crafting is really just going to be dependent on those best in slot list, which I don't have at the moment, but once those become active and actually get posted, that's where you're going to want to look. Up first, we have the Arathi pattern. So right here, this is your mail gloves. Once again, feel free to pause and read these equipped bonuses if you'd like. Then we have the Unifying Flame. This right here is actually a optional crafting reagent. This is an embellishment itself, so you can apply this to either unembellished weapons or offhands. Then we have the Nerubian pattern. So right here, we have an embellished waist. We have an embellished wrist, and then yet again we have another just embellishment which can actually be applied to armor. Then we have a bunch of bestial items. So right here there is that buckle that we talked about earlier. We have another set of feet. We have a hands, wrist, chest, and then another chest. Then second to last, we have all of that PvP gear that I mentioned earlier. So right here we have the leather belt, and this is all of the leather stuff. All of these kind of use this specific carapace, that's probably pronounced super wrong, back tied. This is kind of the known PvP reagent for leatherworking. Same thing, it goes with all of the mail items. Basically, you're either just using storm charged leather or you're using gloom chitin, and then you have all of your high-end equipment. So you have your smock, you have the gauntlets, you have the cap and the pack, you have the apron, you have the cover, the hat, and lastly, the other pack. And so remember, all of these cost like 150 artisan acuity each. Some of them also need 1500 kej, so it definitely will be a grind getting all of those recipes. Now, in terms of actually leveling leatherworking, that's a little bit of a tongue twister. Leveling actually isn't that bad. Strictly through the trainer learned recipes that you see right here, I was able to hit skill level 75. Now, I will say once you hit like the 65 mark, especially the 70 mark, it gets a little bit painful and you're really just dealing with RNG because all of the recipes are green. But if you want to take a look at my inventory, of course this isn't perfect, but all of this gear that you see right here is what I crafted to quickly hit 75. So in a lot of this gear was just trying to get those last 5 points because I had really awful RNG, but in terms of hitting 75, it should be pretty easy. The remarkable thing about actually being able to hit this exact skill level is that in the War Within, in order to unlock all 4 specializations, you have to be 75 out of 100. It used to be 100 out of 100, but they scaled it back down. Meaning, if you can hit this mark, if you have enough gold to kind of power level through, you can unlock all 4 specializations and put points really anywhere that you want. But in terms of actually hitting 100, you're really just bound to either spark crafts or some really expensive armor kits. So as always, your armor is going to give you +3 skill, and that basically works all the way to 100. So if you want to use the crafting order system, whether you want to use your alt sparks or find people who want this gear, you can simply just craft a few pieces and max out. You also have the option to do profession equipment, and according to how beta is right now, these armor kits will get you to 100, but it's going to be very, very pricey. So to those who don't know, the profaned tinderbox as well as this gloom hide come from treasures. They're likely going to be pretty expensive, at least early on, and these armor kits will turn green around 90, so that 90 to 100 stretch will be very, very painful, but technically if you have the gold to spend, at least in the current beta build, you can actually max out to 100. So really, it comes down to how much gold you have. Remember, you also have to unlock these recipes, which cost artisan acuity, so it's going to come down to whether you want to go like the slower method of armor and, spark crafting, or you can go the faster route. You could also technically use these embellishments, but at the end of the day, it's going to just be time versus cost. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's dive into specializations, and we need to actually backtrack and talk about different types of items. So, like I mentioned before, a lot of pieces that you'll see are either considered Arathi items, Nerubian items, or Bestial items, and this really is highlighted by the type of reagents they use. So in this Arathi section, you'll see that this profaned tinderbox is required, and this is basically the mark of Arathi. So like I said, these come from treasures, at least that's the current known source. This could come from other things, but these are likely going to be pretty expensive items. But anything kind of using this item is kind of considered that Arathi craft. Up next, we have the Nerubian patterns, which same sort of thing, but these use these vials. So yet again, you'll have to collect these vials, but everything that use that kind of is known as your Nerubian item. And then lastly, we have the Bestial pattern, which is marked by really these fangs right here, as well as the hides we saw earlier. So for example, right here, this Gloom Fathom hide right here kind of marks it as a potential beastly item. Something else I want to mention is this superb beast fang right here. As you'll notice, this is used for basically all of these bestial patterns, as well as blacksmithing weapons, so feel free to check out the blacksmithing video if you like. But this fang is the potential new Cobra skin. So if you guys played in Dragonflight in 10.1, the Obsidian Cobra skin was a rare skinning item coming from a daily skin, and they sold for like 50,000 gold a piece in early 10.1. They of course dropped as weeks went on, but you could comfortably get like 10k for a Cobra skin, which was pretty nice, especially for like a 5-minute daily skin that you might get. As of current beta, this fang is actually gotten the exact same way as the Cobra skin. So you basically just need to put 50 points into skinning, go to a specific location, spawn the mob, kill it, and hope that it drops the skin, or skin it I should say, and then hope that it drops this fang. Of course, ultimately, the demand of these items is going to determine if this fang is actually worth it or not, but if you are interested in kind of skinning, feel free to take a look at this item, and definitely if you have alt armies, this could be a potential awesome daily gold maker. As of right now, I don't have a video specifically on this fang, but if you are interested in this concept, feel free to look up my Cobra skin video. Of course, the exact talent tree I show in that video is wrong, as well as the location, but that exact same scenario is what happens. You put points into a specific tree, go to a specific location, spawn it, kill it, and you're done. But alright, with that being said, we can actually dive into the 4 specializations. Up first, we have Learned Leatherworker, which is basically your generic tree. If you're familiar with my other videos, I kind of say that whatever tree kind of affects all of your crafts is considered generic. However, you do have to be a little bit careful with this tree. Unlike a lot of other professions, this tree does not actually give you skill. It's really just for all of your secondary stats. So you have ingenuity, concentration, resourcefulness, and multicraft. So up first right here, this is going to give you +3 ingenuity every time you put in a point, as well as a bunch of concentration perks. So you can feel free to read these right here. and at the very end, you're going to gain a boost in ingenuity, as well as crafting speed, and finally, resourcefulness. But do keep in mind, this applies to everything leatherworking. If you go to the bottom, this is going to be purely for your concentration, so yet again, feel free to read this. You also get some ingenuity. Feel free to pause if you want to wait, and that's really just going to be your main concentration / ingenuity tree. To the left, you have Waste Not, which is your resourcefulness tree, so you're going to get more items refunded when resourcefulness actually proc, but you're also going to get stats for resourcefulness, so you have a higher chance of it actually proccing. Then lastly, you have Multicraft, where you're just going to get more items when you actually proc Multicraft, and then also a higher chance to proc Multicraft itself. Now, the things I want to say about this tree is that yes, this tree is good, but it might not be exactly what you want to spec into first. I talk more about this in my blacksmithing video, but ingenuity and concentration is really going to be not that great of a mechanic for a lot of your main crafters. The reason why I say that is that 99% of all items are guaranteeable at their highest quality, which was not the case in Dragonflight. So, for example, if we take a look at these reagents up here, right now I cannot guarantee quality 3, but if I was at 100 out of 100 leatherworking, I was spec'd into all the correct specializations, and I had my blue tools, as well as using the highest quality of reagents, I would be able to guarantee this at the max quality, meaning I have no use for concentration. Now, of course, if I decide to use, let's say, quality 2 reagents to cut down on my cost compared to quality 3, then concentration will help me. But the issue with concentration is that it's super limited. For example, right here at this point, I'm missing, a pretty good amount of skill, about 165 skill, and it's going to cost me 300 concentration to guarantee quality 3. Now, this might make me gold and might make me profit, especially if I get a little bit more skill and can drop down this quality, but I only have 1,000 concentration, so I could only craft 3 items. So while these 3 crafts may give me like 500 profit each, if I just maxed out all of my skill, I could maybe guarantee 100 profit per craft. Now, of course, that's less per craft, but I could craft as many of these as I want because I can guarantee quality 3, and I don't have to rely on a finite resource like concentration. Of course, if you're doing alt army stuff, or if you are just doing it casually, concentration can't help you. It will be worth speccing into that, but at the end of the day, for most crafters, if you're going for like min-maxing the best thing possible, this tree isn't really great, at least the ingenuity notes. Besides that, you have multicraft and resourcefulness, which is very, very important. Going back to the reagents, let's say you are maximizing quality 3, this will be an expensive craft, and gaining as much multicraft as you can is going to be extremely powerful. Same thing goes if you are crafting armor. Of course, you can't proc multicraft, but resourcefulness is going to be your best friend. In terms of actually when to spec into this tree, I would probably wait until the end, as you would probably want to actually guarantee the craft and then increase your multicraft. It's really going to be up to you. So yes, this tree is important, but it probably should not be your first pick. Now, the one caveat I do want to add just real quick is that while this right here is your multicraft node, this does give skill towards consumables and reagents. I wouldn't consider this a generic tree skill node because it doesn't affect all crafts, it only affects consumables and reagents. Now we're going to quickly look at the actual reagent specialized node, and that's going to give you a lot more skill per knowledge points, so that's probably going to be a safer bet to actually spec into first, but just something to keep in mind, this right here does give you skill. It's really just going to depend on you when you actually want to go into it. Moving on, we have our leather tree. So the next 2 trees are basically the exact same. It's just going to be your leather version and your mail version. And this is really for any sort of armor crafting, especially your unembellished pieces. So up first, like any sort of traditional armor spec, you're gonna have to choose exactly what piece you're going for. So in this case, let's say you want to go for the waistbands. All you would have to do is unlock this specialization, put in 10 points. Every time you put in a point, you're going to gain skill for all of these pieces. Right here, you got some more ingenuity, but once you have 10 points in, you'll be able to choose a sub-spec. Like I said, we're going for waistband, so we're going to choose that secondary sub-spec, and then we'll have to put 10 points in here. And then lastly, you can choose that actual piece. And immediately upon learning this right here, we're going to gain the recipe. So in terms of your first item, it's about a 20-point investment. From there, in terms of what you want to max out first is kind of up to you. The perk about upgrading the actual waistband first is that you're going to get a bunch of skill. So every point you put in is automatically 1 skill, but right here you're going to gain +5, +5, +10, and finally a big +20, as well as a concentration buff. This middle tier is going to yet again give you a little bit of more things. So right here, this is resourcefulness, and then this right here is ingenuity, and then lastly, you're going to be able to use finishing reagents. And of course, you'll be able to learn sub-specializations on the way. So it's kind of up to you. Like, yes, you're going to gain 1 skill every time you put in points here. You know, if you put in 20 points, that's 20 skill. If you decide to put 20 points here, you're going to get 20 skill just on your +1s, plus another 5, another 5, another 10, and then another 20. So a ton of skill comes from here. Yet again, this only affects waistbands, and this middle one affects all 4 branches. Then of course, you do have the main overall spec. This is going to give you resourcefulness, ingenuity, and then as well as a crafting buff, or speed buff, I should say, which is nice, as well as some other stats. But ultimately, if you are going for waistbands, let's say you want to craft this waistband as best as you can, you're going to want to maximize the actual waistband, your middle tier, as well as your main tier. So you're looking at 30, 30, as well as 20, so basically an 80-point investment for waistbands. Now, same exact thing applies over here, so all of your unembellished pieces right here, if you're looking for the male versions, just spec into one of these. It's the exact same setup. So if you put in 10 points here, you'll be able to choose a sub-specialization. You can put another 10 points in, and then you can pick this one right here, and you gain your recipe. You put points into the last branch, you'll gain a bunch of skill. Middle branch, you'll gain some stats, as well as the ability to use finishing reagents. And lastly, that main skill up here, you'll gain some stats, as well as a speed bonus. So in terms of unembellished pieces, this is pretty simple. Lastly, we have Flawless Fortes, which is going to be an interesting spec, and they kind of threw everything else leatherworking related into this tree. Up first, you have your generalized main node, which is going to give you a ton of skill for anything involving in this specialization. This considers the items specialty items, but basically this is like crafting reagents, this is your embellished gears, this is your optional reagents, your embellishments, your profession equipment, basically anything that's just not standard. But as soon as you put points in, once you put 10 points in, you'll gain your ability to choose 1 subspecialization. You'll also gain some resourcefulness, ingenuity, resourcefulness, and lastly, ingenuity. Starting from the right, we have Spotless Stitching, which is for all of your consumables. So this is your armor kits, this is your reagents, and other consumable goods, which count as like embellishments and things like that. So immediately upon learning, you'll be able to actually use finishing reagents on these items. Then you'll gain a bunch of multicraft, a bunch of skill, multicraft, skill, multicraft, and lastly, you'll gain a combination of skill, ingenuity, as well as less concentration. So kind of like at the beginning, I talked about how I made a lot of gold with reagents. This is definitely going to be the spec you want to go into. Up next, keeping it kind of simple, we have profession equipment. So this applies to really any of that equipment that we saw, which actually is a good chunk of them. And this right here, we have just a bunch of skill, resourcefulness, skill, ingenuity, skill, resourcefulness, and finally, yet again, more ingenuity, concentration, as well as skill. Up next, going back to those categories that I talked about right before specializations, these are when they come back to play. So right here, we have everything that deals with those bestial items. So of course, you'll gain a bunch of skill at every point you put in, but immediately upon unlocking, you're actually going to gain 2 of your recipes. So either the vest or the smoldering pollen. If any of these show up on your best in slot list, that's how you get these items. Then you'll just gain more resourcefulness, more skill, ingenuity, skill, resourcefulness, as well as a bulk of everything, which is kind of the same theme. This really applies to all of these subspecs. Same exact thing for the Nerubian type items, so everything that uses that vial. So right here we have the armor banding, we have resourcefulness, skill, ingenuity, skill, resourcefulness, and finally a batch of all three. And then following the trend, we also have Arathi. So going back here, you'll get one of the recipes, all of these secondary stats, and finally that combination of all three at the very end. And so what this means is that specializations get a little bit more complicated depending on the type of item you're looking for. So if we want to look back at recipes, let's say this unifying flame item actually ends up being best in slot, right? If this is best in slot, you're going to want to actually guarantee this. What specializations actually affect this? Well, right off the bat, this is an Arathi pattern. You know this because it uses a tinderbox, so automatically you know you need to go into Arathi Armorer, meaning this main node right here also affects it. So immediately you're going to want to max out Arathi Armorer, which is a 30-point investment, as well as maxing out this, which is yet again another 30-point investment. So you're already 60 points in. But we have to take a look, and this is also a leather feat item. So this is an armor piece that uses leather, that's also feat. So if we go back to the leather over here, we find the feat, boom. So now if you actually want all of the skill possible, now you need 20 points into kickers, then you need embroidered leather armor, and finally luxurious leathers. So that's another 80 points right there. We were 60 over here, so that's a lot of points into this one item. Then of course, remember this is actually a crafted armor piece, so multi-craft doesn't work, but we do have resourcefulness, meaning you can go over here and you're going to want to max out resourcefulness. And of course, if you wanted to, you could also max out both of these for concentration and ingenuity buffs, but that's not going to matter as much, assuming you can guarantee it at quality 5. But that's kind of where leatherworking gets a little bit complicated, because these types of items start corresponding and overlapping, creating a lot of points required to actually get them at their fullest potential. Another example of this is if we actually go back to reagents. Remember I said that this actually explicitly says that it's Nerubian, meaning this is actually tied to the Nerubian specialization. So starting off basic, this is a reagent, meaning automatically spotless stitching is going to help it because this is for reagents. So automatically you're going to want 30 points into fortes as well as 30 points into stitching. But also it explicitly says it's Nerubian, meaning you're also going to want points into Nerubian. So you're looking at 90 points just for these 3 nodes. However, of course, it is a reagent, meaning multicraft is going to help. So you also want to put points into innovations, and while it's not as profitable as multicraft, you can also spec into resourcefulness, because that affects both of these. And then while we're at it, now of course it might not be that great if you can guarantee the craft, but you technically could also spec into ingenuity. So technically this whole tree right here could be spec'd into, as well as the 3 nodes right here. So that's what I mean about how leatherworking is simple on the outside, but it definitely gets confusing in terms of specializations. The last example that I'll bring up is also the Defender's Armor Kit. So going back, as always, very simple. This is an armor kit, so right here stitching is going to help, and if it's in this tree then you also want the main node, so boom, automatically you have fortes and stitching, very similar to the reagent. But if we take a peek over here, this also uses a tinderbox, which of course is that Arathi item. So Arathi Armorer is actually going to help this armor kit. If we take a look at my current skill, we're at 235. If I unlock this, and let's just, put in a few points, if we go back here, as you can see, now I'm at 247. If we put in one more point, I'm at 248. So while this explicitly has no sort of Arathi label on it, unlike the reagent, it's using that Arathi item saying, hey, Arathi stuff actually affects this. Then of course, very similar to the reagents, this is a craftable, stackable item, so resourcefulness, multicraft, and even ingenuity also affect it. So multicraft is going to be, your first pick, then resourcefulness, and of course, if you want concentration, you can, but it's not necessary. But yeah, on the outside, specializations are pretty simple. You basically have your secondary stat tree, you have leather, mail, as well as just everything else. The confusing thing is where things start overlapping, but thankfully I have a tool to help you with this. CraftSim is a great add-on. This add-on was created back in Dragonflight by one of the members of our community, so shout out to him. And I do have a few videos on CraftSim, which I'll have some updated versions for the War Within once the expansion is actually out. But CraftSim does a lot of things like calculating average profit, can actually track your crafting results, etc. But the thing that I want to point out is the specialization info tab right here. And what this is going to allow you to do is actually track what nodes affect each recipe without you having to guess. So if we go back to that writhing hide right here, you can see exactly what we talked about. Right here, we have the spotless stitching, which was that reagent subnode, which we saw earlier, as well as flawless fortes, which was the main node of that specializations tree. Then we also have Nerubian show up, because this is a Nerubian item. And then we have all four of that generic tree right here. We have the concentration, we have the waste knot, which is the resourcefulness, we have the multicraft tree, as well as just the generic leatherworking tree right here. So in terms of what you need to actually max this craft out is listed here right for you. And so this is great for all professions, but especially leatherworking where everything kind of overlaps, this is definitely a time saver. The last thing, like I said, we looked at the armor kit just a second ago. You can see right here that Arathi armorer shows up because of that tinderbox. And if we take a look at the other armor kit, you notice that this uses that gloom hide. And so instead of using the Arathi, you'll see that the beastly actually shows up. And that's because this right here is kind of tied to all of those beast patterns. So depending on the type of reagents it uses is really going to affect the type of specialization you need to go into. But yeah, that's kind of it for leatherworking. As always, I highly recommend installing this add-on. You can get it now. It works for Dragonflight, and of course it's going to work for the War Within. I currently have it on beta, but by the time this video is posted, early access is on its way and release is basically within a week, so don't feel like you have to go on beta and look at this all now. It'll be there for you whenever the servers go live. But everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'll try to answer them as fast as possible. And do keep in mind that this is beta. I'm recording this potentially before the last huge beta build, Tuesday before early access, we might see a huge build again. I'm hoping not many things change, but it's always a possibility, so do keep an eye out on changes. I always update people in the Discord, so that's the best place to hang out if you want to know more about beta. But as always, everybody, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good day.